All right, great. So we left off, we were in our discussion of multinational corporations and the negative effects of foreign direct investment. Now, there are some measures that have been taken to mitigate the effects of multinationals, or the negative effects of multinationals entering foreign countries, and these are kind of your international codes of conduct. And so an international code of conduct, let's see if I can get out of the way here. An international code of conduct is a voluntary kind of aspirational statement that MNCs use to set forth standards for their foreign operations. I would also put this under the corporate social responsibility banner. One of the more famous ones is the Sullivan Principles, and that comes from a 1997 code of conduct that's required of multinational corporations that work in South Africa to do business in a non-discriminatory way. You have to remember that in South Africa you had apartheid, where kind of South Africans of European descent and local South Africans were not treated equally. So the Sullivan Principles basically says that you have to conduct business in South Africa and basically ignore the principles of apartheid or any sort of racial discrimination. There's also things like the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as OECD. They work to kind of further economic growth through liberalization of trade. And the OECD is a large international organization, but all they can really do is just make recommendations for corporations that operate within and outside their borders. The guidelines are extensive, but they're totally voluntary. Typically, there's no force of law behind them. A corporation can choose to follow them or not to follow them. They get the choice. Of course, every government that's in the OECD usually have these guidelines, and they set up an office. They have this national contact point, and an individual group can, of course, file a complaint in one of these offices. And there is a process that they go through where they assess. OECD assesses the complaint. If it's indeed that it's a valid complaint, they can offer to mediate dispute between the parties. And if the mediation is rejected or it fails, they can issue a final statement about the matter, which includes recommendations. But again, it's totally voluntary. Corporations don't actually have to follow up on these recommendations if they don't wish to. The United Nations Global Compact, also some principles that are set up. Again, they're voluntary. There's not a lot of teeth behind it. Why might you actually follow some of these? Again, it's kind of like the labeling schemes that we talked about in our corporate social responsibility lecture. If you can certify and attest that you follow these voluntary international codes, then that can give your stakeholders a degree of confidence in your company, and they might be more willing to do business with you. Again, when you think about when these human rights violations are shown from multinational corporations, it's usually really bad for business. It's usually really bad for profits. So if you can show that you actually don't engage in any of these offenses, then in the long run you might be better off. Of course, companies can also engage in blue washing. That basically said it's a way of disguising your actual performance in such a way that makes it look like you're following the rules when actually you're not. Okay. Now, of course, I just talked about how some of these international organizations can provide recommendations, and you don't have to really follow them. Again, in some ways, that's almost implying that corporations are deliberately not following these recommendations. That's not always true. And again, it comes back to our age-old managerial problem of bounded rationality. So again, you have to think about a CEO or some of the executives headquartered in the United States, and they have their foreign operations. They may not actually know everything that's going on in that firm. It may be that there's violations going on, but they're not necessarily planned violations. It's not necessarily the intent to break the law or violate human rights. There's also that possibility. Part of it also, so some of it may relate to just we can't supervise all of our employees at any given time. There may be abuse within our company domestically as well as internationally, although it is going to be hard to track internationally. And of course, dealing with transaction cost economics. In order to reduce search costs, you may make some shortcuts when dealing with a supplier, and these suppliers may wind up behaving unethically, and you don't really have a way to know, and you don't necessarily have the time or the ability to inspect and assess the operations of your subcontractors. So bounded rationality can also come into play here. So it's not always malicious intent on the part of executives. It might be sometimes, I'm not denying that, but I would also argue not always. Now, one thing that you do need to know is the Alien Tort Claims Act. This is relevant. The Alien Tort Claims Act comes from, it's actually one of our first laws, and it says that foreign citizens can litigate in a foreign court wrongful actions occurring anywhere in the world that violate international law or U.S. treaties. So if a U.S. company is doing something illegal in a foreign country, those citizens in that foreign country can litigate against that American company in a U.S. federal court. So, if you have a multinational corporation that has headquarters in a developing country, they're abusing their laborers, any of those laborers can litigate in a U.S. federal court against that multinational corporation. Now, the same also goes the other way around. U.S. citizens can also litigate against foreigners, although that can get kind of complicated. The roots of the Alien Tort Claims Act come from the Barbary Coast pirates. These were pirates that were attacking U.S. vessels. That was actually our first war as a young nation. They were attacking U.S. Vessels and abusing the sailors and whatnot, and so that's how that came about. That law was in response to that. All right, great. So this concludes our portion on multinational corporations. My name is Duncan Pelly. I hope you found this lecture informative and entertaining, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.